Listen up, folks. I'm the Code Ninja, and this is an urgent security advisory explainer. We're executing a coordinated vulnerability disclosure today on a critical container escape vulnerability that's literally tearing down the walls of isolated environments as we speak. Make no mistake, if you operate Linux container hosts, your perimeter is actively under threat right now. 4. That is the exact number of years since the patch for the zero-day vulnerability was initially released to the public. You heard that right, 4 years. And yet, threat actors are still actively hunting for neglected infrastructure. An actual active exploitation is happening right now in the wild. All right, let's look at the threat profile we're dealing with. It's CVE 2022-0492. It's carrying a CVSS 3.1 score of 7.8, which means it's a high-severity local attack vector targeting the Linux kernel cgroups v1 subsystem. The impact here is absolute. We are talking full privilege escalation and complete container escape. The objective of this disclosure is very direct. We are here to give you immediate mitigation tactics and force vendor patches across your perimeters before your nodes get compromised. Okay, let's dive into this timeline so we can actually understand the threat lifecycle. This vulnerability was first discovered way back in February 2022 by Huawei researchers, and a formal kernel patch was released just a month later, in March. But look at the critical alert at the bottom there. On June 2nd, 2026, this was officially added to the CISA Known Exploited Vulnerabilities catalog, and that triggered today's strict CISA federal remediation deadline of June 5th, 2026. Time has officially run out. Our core objective today is to force those vendor patches and protect the perimeter. See, threat actors are banking heavily on your deferred maintenance. They're aggressively scanning for legacy Linux servers, embedded IoT devices, and neglected container hosts that have just been left running without the proper kernel updates. Before we pivot to phase 3 and get into the actual technical mechanics of the protocol, I need a tactical comms check. DevOps engineers, SecOps professionals, defenders out there on the front lines, are you receiving this transmission? To maintain a secure communication link for real-time intelligence as this specific threat evolves, you've got to establish that comm link by subscribing to @cybertech79 right now. Furthermore, I need you to transmit an ACK. Just hit the like button on this advisory explainer as your formal acknowledgement of receipt. Honestly, consider these actions a basic security necessity for your ongoing operations. Phase 3. Defining the blast radius when the walls collapse. We really must understand exactly what happens to your infrastructure when those container isolation walls fail. The impact here is completely catastrophic, especially when we're talking about shared infrastructure and multi-tenant environments. A compromised container absolutely does not stay isolated. The blast radius includes complete host server takeover with root privileges. From there, attackers are harvesting your stored database credentials, they're stealing multi-tenant cloud connection details, and they're deploying platform-wide ransomware. When they break out, you aren't just losing a single container workflow. You are literally handing over the entire node. To defend against this, we have to break down the fundamental Linux kernel architecture. Linux provides isolation through control groups, or cgroups, which are used to limit system resources. Now, inside legacy cgroups v1, there is a very specific feature called the release_agent. As you can see, it's designed to execute a specified user space program when a cgroup becomes empty. It was meant to be a simple cleanup mechanism, but unfortunately, it is the exact target of this exploit. So the crucial point is this zero-day flaw, which is classified as CWE862. The Linux kernel's cgroup_release_agent_write function completely failed to verify namespace boundaries. It just entirely missed the authorization check to ensure that the user modifying the release_agent actually possessed the cap_sys admin capability in the initial user namespace, rather than just inside some newly created, totally unprivileged one. Let's walk through the exact step-by-step container escape protocol attackers are using to bypass your isolation. First, the attacker uses the unshare command inside the container to create a new user namespace, artificially giving themselves local sysadmin rights. Second, they use those newly acquired rights to mount the cgroup FS directly to the container. Third, they write the path of their malicious payload right into the release agent file. Fourth, they add a dummy process ID to the group.prox file. Fifth, they kill that process, which empties the group. And finally, step 6, that action triggers the release agent, and the kernel just blindly executes the attacker's payload as root right there on your host machine. Now, interestingly enough, this exploit isn't some unstoppable magic bullet. It actually requires a few specific misconfigurations to succeed. The container has to be running legacy groups v1. It's also likely running as privileged, or at least has the cap_DAC override capability. Your host must have unprivileged user namespaces enabled, and critically, security modules like AppArmor or SLinux, as well as cgroup filtering, have to be disabled. Knowing this empowers you as defenders, because if you enforce standard security profiles, the unshare and mount syscalls are blocked and the whole attack just fails. Phase 3 continued, the patch directive, immediate mitigation tactics. That brings us to our defensive response. Here are the immediate mitigation tactics you need to implement to secure your perimeter before the CISA deadline expires. You need to deliver these rapid-fire instructions to your infrastructure teams immediately. First up, apply the kernel patches. Update your host kernel to version 5.17 or the relevant backported stable branch for whatever distribution you're running. If you absolutely cannot reboot and patch today, you have to harden your containers to buy yourself some time. Drop the cap_sys_admin capability using the -cap drop equals sys_admin flag. Strip the -privilege flag from all of your container workloads, and please strictly enforce your AppArmor, SELinux, and cgroup profiles across the board. And this brilliantly illustrates the long-term structural defense strategy we need to be aiming for. Legacy cgroups v1 relies on that release agent feature, which inherently leaves a massive attack surface wide open for privilege escalation. Conversely, cgroups v2 structurally removes the release agent and notify on release files entirely. So by migrating your environments over to cgroups v2, you permanently nullify this specific container escape vector right at the architectural level. As we enter Phase 4, we really must address the process behind this disclosure. You might be wondering, why do we broadcast the exact mechanics of a weaponized exploit like this? Because, simply put, users need to know to protect their systems. Coordinated vulnerability disclosure is an absolute operational necessity for defenders. Relying on obscurity only serves the threat actors who are already actively exploiting these 4-year-old blind spots out in the wild. This builds a very clear, urgent picture of your operational reality. I want to leave you with this provocative question. Are your legacy deployments just silently waiting to be breached today? Neglected infrastructure is quite literally a ticking time bomb. You must audit your shared environments, verify your container host kernels, and enforce your security boundaries immediately. Patch your kernels, lock down those container privileges, protect the perimeter. This concludes the Code Ninja Security Advisory Explainer. Stay secure.